Welcome to this seminar on how can Ecocide Law help direct our techno-economic power. We are the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, and on my left is Neshan Gunasekera, who is a lawyer and visiting fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. I'm delighted you're here. Elina Eriksson, you're the in-house person because you work here at the Royal Institute of Technology, where you are an associate professor and co-lead of the Sustainable Futures Lab. Kevin Noon, professor of chemical meteorology, and I still wonder what it is, at the Stockholm University. Kristín Vala Ragnarsdóttir, professor at Iceland University, Sustainable. And Jonas Ropé, corporate strategist, who, and I will never get over this, okay? Before he was 30, he'd rewritten the corporate strategy of Ericsson. He works with systemic change. So I'm just going to start you off with one question, and then I'll tell you what's going to happen after that. So what's your name? It's always nice to say it. And what's one reason why you decided you wanted to be here today or were persuadable to be here today? It's one.
For me, can you hear me? Yeah. For me, Ecocide Law is a game changer that is very, very central and important. And it's also a hope bringer in a time where we desperately need hope and we desperately need systemic change that can go fast. So I'm delighted to be here and talking and listening about this.
For me, once I realized what Ecocide Law could do, I couldn't find another bigger one step we could take to protect the Earth's biosphere and leave a world for future generations which is livable. That's why I'm here.
For me, I think to enact systemic change, to really change our world, we need each other. There's no bunch that can do it on themselves by themselves. And so my attraction is to learn from everybody else in the room and as to how we can collaborate and actually change the world for the better.
Yeah, and I think that Ecocide Law is an interesting thing because I actually think it's a kind of Trojan horse. So I might come back to that.
Thank you, Mai. I'm Neshan. Aibowan Wanakam and Assalamu alaikum. And my one reason and persuasion to being here is my small contribution and participation in something called the Earth Trusteeship Journey, of which the Ecocide Law is an inherent part.
Okay, so the structure of what we'll be doing today is we'll start off with presentations by Jonas and Vala, because they have co-authored a couple of reports on Ecocide Law. Ecocide Law for the Paris Agreement and Ecocide Law for an economy within planetary boundaries. And so they'll give us a quick run through of the highlights from there. We'll give them the stage while they're doing that. And then we'll all come back for a panel discussion, following which you can ask any questions you like, and we will do our best to answer them. And that goes for people online as well. When we get to the questions section, you will be able to write your questions in the chat or the Q&A or something. I think it's the chat. So stay with us while we file off the stage and leave it to you.
Okay. So, a few topics we'll run through. What is Ecocide Law? Or what is the consensus definition? What difference will it make on a high level? What is the process? How do we get it in place? And then we have some exciting thing we think that is the scientific call to action. And let's see if we can change picture. So I cannot help myself but give you a very brief, shallow, you could say, but also deep reply on the question that we had on the first page. So you could say that technology greatly enhances our capacity as mankind. If you have AI, it increases with the speed of light, intense, without wisdom though. And the Ecocide Law changes the direction of what you say is a safety rail. And with technology, we've got godlike powers, and we need godlike wisdom to harness them. And awaiting that, and as a key thing to change culture, mindset, perspective, paradigms, and direction, Ecocide Law will be helpful. It will not do everything, but it will be very helpful. So the Rome Statute is where the Ecocide Law is targeted as an amendment. There are 4 crimes, as you can see here. 3 crimes, 4 crimes. So genocide, crimes against humanity, the war crime, crime of aggression. And so it's an amendment, so adding a 5th crime, not creating an entire institution, not rewriting everything, but use the criminal court and amending it. The consensus definition was crafted by 12 leading experts in not only international law, but in law in the Rome Statute. So there are experts in the field of the International Criminal Court, working, most of them, if not all of them, with the other 4 crimes and with international law. And this is the 4th definition. When they came out with this definition, being experts in the field, the entire movement and support of Ecocide really jumped. And it's up in the UN, and it's, as you will see, across many sectors, there's a wide support. And the definition they came up with is unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So we're talking about acts. It's designed, the entire International Criminal Court is designed to target the individuals with, you could say, supreme power or power behind those acts. And there are thresholds, this is what you call them, that it needs to be severe, which is defined widespread or long-term. And wanton is a word that we come back to many times in the economy report, because it's progressive and it's very cleverly defined. So this is Ecocide definition, as I said, called the consensus definition. If you look at research about the legal, you could say, domain, the international legal domain, there is this word which is kind of debated in itself about soft and hard law. And you can argue that the Paris Agreement is hard law because you have targets that you've determined and so on, but it's really not much consequence if you fail to meet them. And much of the international justice is soft, so the enforcement might be lacking. It might be, unclear who has jurisdiction and so on and so forth. So we have 2 professors here that said that this weak arrangement that we have, they're generally good, but are insufficient when the benefits of cooperation is great, but the potential for opportunism and the costs of it is great. Also, if violation impose significant externalities on others, and if national actions have many external effects, so that the concept of natural sovereignty is working against the planet, and if non-compliance is difficult to detect or curb in time. So 4 things when the soft arrangements aren't to lean on. So this is the difference with having ecocide as an international crime. And I'll leave it over to you.
So you have so you heard from Jonas that we have these international agreements, but Paris Agreement, 2015, CO2 is still rising. So it's not working. So we need something more. And I thought that this quote was very revealing from a former head of UN development program. He said, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to deal with that. And that's where we are. We definitely need a new way of living in this world, but we can use the law to help us because we need some swift actions. So today, we are generating the earth faster than it can regenerate itself. And it's legal. But with Ecocide Law in place, we can put a rail around this and help the earth rebuild its capacity to regenerate itself. And you all know why climate change is occurring. It's because we are burning old carbon, which has taken the earth millions of years to put into deposits that we can use, like coal, oil and gas. We have sinks on land and in the oceans, but they're not coping to take up all this old carbon we are putting into the atmosphere. But with Ecocide Law, we could strengthen these the capacity of the earth to take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And therefore, it's critical that we get this law in place. Now, if we look at the economy is driving all this, the extraction, consumption. And you could say that it's overconsumption, which is a big part of the problem. We could always also say it's overproduction. So we're producing to make more gadgets to sell. And so the economy is operating outside the railing of the ecosystems. And we need to pull the economy inside the planetary boundaries. Now, you could say, do we have the money to do this? And just looking at one sector, at the moment we are putting $6 trillion a year into subsidizing fossil fuels. But what has been asked for is about half of that in order to keep climate within 2 degrees. So the money is in the system. We just have to put it into the right places. And Donella Metters was a brilliant system scientist, and she set forth 12 places to intervene in a system. And these places can be divided into parameters, feedbacks, design, and intent. And where we are operating, such as subsidies and taxes and standard and so on, is here number 12, parameter of the system, and it hardly changes it at all. We need to go deeper into the system in order to shift it. And by making Ecocide a law, then we would change the rules of the system or the design of the system. We could even say that it would lead to a new paradigm where it becomes unlawful and criminal to destroy the Earth's ecosystems. And
Thank you. So you had with the illustration, Vala presented an overview of systemic change. You could also go into different aspects of technology. So in this case, we have AI and Ecocide Law, and in these 4 categories Vala talked about. So parameters, targets, and structures. So you could say that artificial intelligence can help us with making and finding best practice, whereas Ecocide Law puts a preventive impulse or reflex at source when companies or universities make that decision to go to something that is more destructive or regenerative. Processes improving feedback. You could say that everything in nature that is alive has feedback built into it, but not our economic system. We are very ignorant for the dangers and signals. So what artificial intelligence can do, and we have a report about as well, but it could add artificial intelligence and transparency across value chain, and not only for companies but for public. And Ecocide Law will have a hard stop, which will be helpful. And when it comes to design, which is about self-organization and intelligence or information, artificial intelligence can help with predictive makes it harder this would happen. So it kind of raises the ability to prosecute, but also raises the ability to avoid for those responsible. And the Ecocide Law here is path dependent and progressive, built into the definition that you just saw, and the keyword there is wanton and how that is defined. And when it comes to intent and worldview, Ecocide Law adds a moral and social baseline, and you could say that we have this Western society which is very clever, very smart, very intelligent, but not very wise. So we add something technology can do. So this is just kind of going into one example. We've looked into climate technology or energy systems in a report. Elina have looked at computing as Ecocide, done something similar. You can go in many aspects and then see what actually is the systemic, how will it work and how it will interfere. The economic and the technology spheres are very interlinked. So we have a type of currency system or economic system that is funding extraction and is funding largely very destructive activities. Which then is paying for the technology. And so we have also the economy report gone through, what difference does it make for the economic system? And you could say there's 3 layers of it. So it upgrades the rules. So we have an international playing field. So if you increase your standards in one country, or in this case all of the world countries, it's not hitting you or hurting you because the jobs and investments go somewhere else. So it's kind of a level playing field. It strengthens international agreements, so it makes the Agenda 2030 or Paris Agreement more easy to reach, and it complements bilateral agreements. Many of these bilateral agreements are used against nature, but with Ecocide Law acting as an umbrella law for corporate law across the world, and for trade agreements, it complements it. So it is not really legal. It's very dangerous to do that. And I won't go in more detail to that now. But looking at it as something that changes the system is surprisingly gentle. It's hard, but it's surprisingly gentle. You really don't have any losers. So if you have invested in tar sand for oil extraction, well, that will be difficult probably. But the land could be put in other uses. So you have a short-term negative impact for some industries, but every individual, not only of the human society, will benefit from it, which is kind of a surprise, I would say. And the process. So you need one signatory state, one state party or country that have signed the Rome Statute to say, we want to start a process. It hasn't been done quite yet. It's up and being discussed in kind of rather, I would say, vividly since last year in the UN. And the reason is that for the process to start, half of the nations signing the Rome Statute need to be agreeing on that. and then to adopt it 2/3, so majority needs to agree. And I would think that it's 30-ish nations that are, seriously, considering to be supported, but we would need 80 or 90 before it's kind of wise to start the process. And then every nation needs to ratify it. But if they don't, there is also an interesting chapter or paragraph 12.3, which Vala taught me about, which means that you can go in ad hoc, and then Ecocide Law is valid, so that Ukraine is looking at it because they haven't signed, neither have the Russia for wartime. And Ecocide Law is actually a crime wartime. The definition is rather weak, but they will use paragraph 12.3 to bring justice into it. And I think I leave it to you.
Okay. So as Jonas has said, the Ecocide Law is already on the political agenda all over the world, which is very encouraging, particularly because we need national governments to decide that they want to support Ecocide Law. And there are active organizations also, like the European Parliament and the Council of Europe and Nordic Council and Interparliamentary Union, which are also discussing it and have made some important decisions. European Parliament, for example, decided in March to take Ecocide into their legal frameworks. Council of Europe did the same in January. So this all of a sudden, it looks like those who are fighting to get Ecocide accepted are seeing huge progress. And, many sort of well-known people are behind it as well, which is good. Then you can talk about the rest.
Okay, so I just can say we are running out of time. We need something that can work rather fast, which Ecocide Law could do, and they are connected. So looking at the solution for each of the separate things, well, it's good, but it's not enough. And one thing that came out last week, which is very nice, is the Exponential Roadmap initiative that rallies a lot of large multinational companies are coming behind Ecocide Law now, and also accelerating circular economy, which is something that opens up more powerfully with Ecocide Law. And to summarize, so the Rome Statute is already impacting how we wage war in wartime in various ways. So it's not, so strange that we would like to stop waging war against nature or our own home planet. So that is what Ecocide Law is about. It changes the game at source before decisions are made by the individuals that don't want to make them with Ecocide Law then. And we have many behind, but don't let that fool you. We need voices from all walks of society and all sectors. So it's not that you can just relax and think that this is a done deal, it will happen, I can go back to sleep. I wouldn't advise that. And there is on endecocide.se the reports Vala and I have done, some more. There's a toolbox which is quite interesting. Stop Ecocide on .earth, they work with a high-level diplomacy, so they are a good source for big news. And there are researchers. We will hear more about more research. And I don't know if it's 2 days old or something, that Monica, I think in particular, kind of champion. So there's a call to action where scientists can sign on and support it. And most of the text comes from this legal expert panel. And the kind of thing that you as a scientist support is just confirming that the scientific basis for the need of system change, of how we take care of our actions on this planet, that is correct. So that's kind of nice, and I think that's it.
Just read out for those of you who would like to go and check out whether you would like to sign. So it's www.stopecocide.earth/scientists. And you're all welcome to go and sign.
And I think we have time for a panel and discussions, and I'm very excited. Thank you.
My new hobby is going online and checking how many people have signed. So far, we have 12 countries from 3 continents. When we have some more, we will put the link, make it public. So, thank you, Jonas and Vala, for the presentations. And up at the panel, yay! We have very deliberately asked people from different backgrounds, different specialties on this panel. And so the obvious question is, looking at it from your area of expertise, why do you think, your top 1 to 3 reasons, why you think this is a good idea? Why do we need ecocide law, looking at it from your perspective? Anybody can start, and let's just hear from everybody.
Okay, so I'll start, since this is my university. Yeah, so me and my colleague Rob Homer, we wrote this paper, Computing as Ecocide, and so my field of research is human-computer interaction, but I also have to teach generally in the intersection between ICT or digitalization and sustainability, and it's awful. I mean, first of all, it doesn't get better. I have to update my slides every year. The numbers get worse all the time. And I also know that within computing, generally, it's really hard to discuss sustainability issues because people think that it's not our problem. I mean, we do algorithms and things, and they can be used for good, but it's not a problem, kind of. Because it is so ephemeral, and digital things are not really tangible, and you can put your hands on them so much. But when writing this paper, it becomes really obvious that computing generally is this great force that accelerates so many other processes from our society and are really part of this destruction of our home. So for me, ecocide law is needed to hinder this. And one thing that we found was that it's really hard to pinpoint who is to blame, since digitalization or computing is so distributed. But still, I think it's important. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, as I said in the beginning, I think it's a Trojan horse. So it fits within the legal system, but when you put your glasses of ecocide law on and you look at all other processes, you start seeing things that you didn't see before. So I think that's the possibility of doing this paradigmatic shift, that it shifts our worldview. Thank you.
Oh, next. So for me, ecocide is a way of stopping a future that we don't want and we can't have. And so let's go into the past first. When during the last ice age, it was the coldest, right? About 22,000 years ago. Global annual average temperatures were about 3.5 degrees lower than they were pre-industrial. 3.5 degrees lower than they were pre-industrial. And at that time, where we are right now, there was about 1.5 kilometers or so of ice over our heads. So think 3.5 degrees, 1.5 kilometers of ice. That's the kind of change that you get globally if you heat the planet up by 3.5 degrees. 1.5 kilometers of ice goes away. If we project into the future, to the end of the century, not over 10,000 years or 20,000 years, but just to the end of the century, 80 years from now, if we take all the pledges that have been given to the FN, to the UNFCCC, and say, okay, the countries will actually honor those pledges, then we get a little less than 3 degrees warming. Ouch. Okay, so that's a completely different world. That is a future that we cannot let happen. And yet that's kind of business as usual. That's what we'll get if we don't do something rather drastic. So my attraction to the Ecocide Law was it gives us another tool to make sure that we avoid that future. That's not a future that any of us wants. I can't, as a climate scientists and environmental scientists tell you exactly what that world will look like. But I can tell you it will not look like the world that we're used to. It'll look very different from that. Are we prepared for that? I don't think so. So Ecocide gives us another tool, a very powerful tool to avoid that. Sorry. Yeah, well, okay. Thanks. The law thing, too. Yeah, that gives us a very powerful tool to avoid that future.
Yeah, I'm the lawyer, so let me talk about the law thing. No, fascinating. Thank you for the presentation. So thank you, Monique, for the question. I'll exercise my right to talk about 3 reasons in response. And you began with the future, I'll begin with the past. It's incredible to be here in Stockholm. 51 years ago, the then Prime Minister Olof Palme first referred to ecocide vis-a-vis the opening of the Stockholm Conference, the United Nations Conference, which led to creating the United Nations Environmental Program, which is one of the key system changes at the multilateral level. So that happened 51 years ago. And reference to ecocide at that stage was with regard to what was going on in Vietnam and the use of certain biological agents as weapons of war. And that's one past. And now here I bring in a bit of philosophy of the indigenous people, 5% of the global population of 8 billion, but sitting on almost 85% of the biodiversity of the planet. Right? So let that sink in for a bit. And 2 individuals in the spirit of what I mentioned, the journey of Earth trusteeship brings me here is one, Judge Christopher Veeramantri, former Vice President of the International Court of Justice, over 27 years ago when he was sitting at the International Court of Justice. One of the most important cases that went before that court was the legality of nuclear weapons. And he wrote a separate judgment in his own opinion in this, and he brought the wisdom of indigenous leaders and indigenous wisdom. And within that, he coined the principles of trusteeship, but he also said, what's happening with things like the nuclear weapon is a crime against future generations. And that has resonance with what we're trying to achieve in Ecocide Law. One other person whom everybody here has either worked with or know is late Polly Higgins, who championed the work on ecocide throughout her life. And unfortunately, she passed away in April 2019, probably at the time the things were taking off on ecocide, because in the presentation we saw so many countries being kind of really taking on the movement for change on ecocide. It's actually happening in the last 18 to 20 months. Yeah. And this is really the power of Polly Higgins. And I bring her also as an Earth trustee from the past, because in Ubuntu philosophy from Africa, we are here today because of all who we are. I am who I am because of who we are. And I think that's past. The present is also Veeramantri Polly Higgins in everyone who's in this room and who's joining us online. Because as we launch the work on proceeding to have a crime defined, with the words of Polly Higgins said, it's another crime against peace. That's important to know. We are trying to figure this out still with so many armed conflicts going around in this part of the world, in various other parts of the world. Should have been different from 100 years ago, but the pattern seems to be more or less 1990 to 1924 going on. Wait a minute, we're in 2023. But to flip the script, I think there are many other tools which brings on. Now, Ecocide Law sits, as you correctly said, Jonas, within international criminal law. There is bodies of international humanitarian law, which is also called law of armed conflict, that looks at things such as long-term impact on the environment during armed conflict. And these are tools that can be used. Is it useful enough? Maybe not. That's where Ecocide Law is a requirement to strengthen it further. But has this been tried and tested in courts? Yes. And finally, the future. This morning, some powerful young people, such as yours here, walked into Strasbourg European Court of Human Rights from Portugal. They're holding the whole European Union account for climate change. And that's two. I'm privileged to know some of the young people from the Pacific Island states who, in their first year in university, exercised their right to be heard. And this March, after 3.5 years of planning, they moved the whole United Nations General Assembly. 132 countries agreed to put the question of climate change to the highest court in the world, the International Court of Justice, which is going to be heard from January next year. Yes, this is a challenging world that we are passing on to the next generation. But the next generation is also picking it up, the intergenerational responsibility, and the partnerships are building. And the final thing, from a lawyer's point of view, I need to be excited about Ecocide Law and others is the convergence of socio-political movements, environmental movements, human rights movements, and young people's movements asking adults, let us work together. I think that's where Ecocide Law hits the next phase of the wave of that convergence. And it's important time that we all come on board.
Thank you.
You next?
Oh, you are next.
I am next. Okay. I remember, because I've been around for a while. Around the year 2000, it may have been 2003, there was a Pentagon report that came out about climate change. Do you remember that, Kevin? And I remember finding it online and reading it. And what did they say? Well, if we don't do anything about climate change, then we're going to have millions of refugees going on boats over the Mediterranean and into Europe. We're there. Then around 2004, we started. I say we because I was then in the UK. The UK started a new Earth System Science program, and the head of the program who was hired was an ecologist who was specialist in fires. Ecosystem and forest fires. And I was just like, Earth System Science, and we hire an ecologist to do this? He said, yes, because when the planet heats up, we'll have more fires. We are there. And CO2 is still rising. And therefore, I do not see anything else that can help us to hold this momentum that we are continuing our life under, except getting this law in place. So I hope it will. I'm keeping up my hope that we will do that, because we need to do that for future generations, for your generation who are sitting here.
Fascinating to listen to. Such a good question too. And yeah, what to say. When you look at how we treat the planet, we are very wasteful with her resources, those that we have actually been lent. We haven't been given them. We're taking the liberty to use them and destroy them and lay waste to ecosystems and the climate. Having a business background, I know in the business sector, you really would like to be a hero, and you really would like to take on and be the best in whatever you do. But the system is rigged. So the better you are at it, the tendency is that the faster the destruction goes. And an interesting model for how we should operate is circular economy, which tells you that if you borrow something from the planet, you should take very, very good care of it. Better care than if you had a rental car, which you don't destroy, but we do that with resources. So a lot of people in the business sector are conflicted. So they could say that I am for Ecocide Law as an individual, but I cannot say that as a company because I don't have the power to represent the entire company. And it's painful. So it's really a release from being imprisoned basically in a car crash that is crashing in slow motion, and there is no driver, there's no steering wheel, and no brake. So it gives takes people off the hook. And looking at sports, I'm not very interested in sports that is collective. I'm more interested personally in individual sports. But I noticed the joy of football players, tennis players, golf players, and how happy they are when they really exceeded everyone's expectations and their own record. And it wouldn't be possible for these amazing achievements if there were no rules, or if the rules were flawed. It would be wrestling, probably, and it wouldn't be pretty. So just upgrading the rules will be such a relief, I think, for many, all the other, billions of people, not only business, but that would really like to make a difference and really like to be heroic. And it will assist us, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. This may be a really stupid question. We do have a lot of regulations when it comes to what you can do to the environment. There are, I don't know how many regulations and laws and so on. Why do we need another one? Over to you.
Thank you. Well, that kind of puts me on the spot here. You're welcome. Exactly. I think Jonas mentioned, I think there's over 35 international conventions and treaties. And let's kind of unpack this a little more with the litigation example I talk about, especially by young people. This gives an opportunity for the available sciences, which has been around for decades. This is not new. IPCC information has been around for decades to bridge the gap between the legal instruments and what is scientifically available. Now, still for that matter, with the discussions going on in various fora, it is not sufficient to meet the 1.5. And there's still a lot of talk. But still, there is still no push to move towards the next level of behavioral change that we require for the systems change. It's too slow. It has been. And, if you look at planetary boundaries that was referred to, we've kind of destroyed the biosphere about 40 years ago, not last 10 years. And that's large majority of where we kind of, as one species, live on the planet. It's a tiny part of the big planet, which is mostly water. So the Ecocide Law adds what you call the punitive element, which will bring in the wider discourse of accountability, which is crucial for us to shift. Unfortunately, the examples are pretty horrible. We had the other side, which is before ecocide, it was genocide, and it had to be two kind of what we call world wars to get us to the word genocide. And that was after many people were killed and murdered, and the violence we are still living today because we're in between wars. And I think as one species, we need to realize that this kind of structural violence needs to be nipped in the bud, and that is Ecocide Law. We are already too late in certain planetary boundaries, which we already know with the sciences. But how far are we going to push the threshold? And it is good to say, as a lawyer, it's fantastic young people are doing this litigation to bring consciousness change. But also, as a young father, I must also think, is this what I want my children to be doing, going to court? Something is missing, right, in that picture? They should be children and have the benefit of being a child that I did, my parents did in their generation, and not take on the problems of the world only in their lifetime. But that's, I think, I leave it out for further input. But I think Ecocide Law is a tool and is an important one to bring in both accountability, both in the legal structure, but especially into the business and the economic model that obviously is not sustainable.
Thank you. I think I'd like to head into the area of systems change. It's been mentioned. And in what ways you've mentioned in what ways it does change the system. What other things are there out there that will change the system? We're talking about big change. What other levers can you see looking at it from your own area of expertise? What else is out there?
Okay, I could start. So you have circular economy, which is a model of a society that could thrive within planetary boundaries. It doesn't deal very well with the social dimension, but with the physical, it's excellent. But it's voluntary. It's kind of like a swamp of anecdotes. So whereas you have more and more anecdotes of companies and sectors and even cities going circular, the world as a whole goes less and less circular. So it needs something that forces the shift. But it's a systemic, so it's basically a map of where would we go as a collective if we shape up. But it's not enough in itself. There's another very powerful tool that is rights of nature. So then you could declare that this big sea, this part of the ocean, this ecosystem, this river, these lakes, they have a right to exist. They have a right to develop. If someone destroys them, cuts off the flow of the entire river, they need to restore it. If they pollute it, they need to restore it. And there's a system of representatives. And it's widely experimented in legal system across the world. And it's said that it may be the biggest environmental movement going on today. But it's a really big, powerful thing. And I think it's really important because then you can protect key areas while waiting for a shape-up of the global system. So that is kind of what I'd like to throw in. But and I have a kind of a question, to sneak in a little bit, and that is, could it be so that we could see a perfect positive storm of all these various systemic ideas that comes up?
I think the biggest problem with our system today is that nature has no rights in front of the law. And I think with our sort of anthropocentric view that we can just use nature as we like, we've demonstrated that with 8 billion people, that doesn't work out. So giving nature right is, I think, crucial. And already around the world, rivers and lake systems and ecosystems have gotten human rights, but they're very few. They're I can count them on, I think there are 7 or 8 around the world, but there are, I understand, over 1,000 litigations in the system. So there are people fighting for the rights of nature. I think that is absolutely crucial to continue that campaign. But definitely, I do not see as big a change happening with anything, whether it's the circular economy or throwing out the neoliberal economists and starting the sharing economy. Those are not going to make as big a difference, I think, as the Ecocide Law can do. But we need all of this.
If I can jump in there, I'd like to hop on that a little bit, Vala, because I think for me, one of the fundamental systemic changes that we need to change is our economic paradigm. And for me, a fascinating aspect of our economic paradigm is it's not very old, right? It's much younger than I am.
Yeah.
And the one that we've got basically was created in the 1970s, roughly, and implemented in the 1980s. And it's not older than that, right? The economic paradigm we had post-World War II until the 1970s is quite different from the one that we have now. And the ones that we were previous to that were even more different, right? So in terms of systemic change, for me, there are a couple of realizations. One is that the economic system is an artifact. It's something we make up, right? There are no gravitational laws in economics. So we can make up a better one. And the cool thing about the Ecocide Law is that it's a stimulus for rethinking how we might be able to make up a better economic paradigm. if we have a legal structure that says, no, you can't simply extract and trash stuff if it's going to have a wanton, long, all the terms that you guys said in the definition of Ecocide Law, then we can easily create an economic paradigm that respects that, right? And works very well within that boundary and the planetary boundaries that have been mentioned several times as well. So I see that there's this wonderful opportunity to jettison something that we know is not working for us. It's in fact leading us in the wrong direction. Create something better and use the stimuli that we have to make that third leg, if you will, of a stool, the economic leg, the scientific leg, the legal leg of the stool, actually hold the stool up instead of like making it tip over.
So I think that I can't really see anything as a strong lever as Ecocide Law would be. That would be like a systemic. Currently, I'm very kind of excited about kind of these underground movements I see in many places looking for inner transition. So shifting the way we are in the world, or shifting the way we view the world, etc. So there are examples of this. For example, the inner development goals that has been started here in Stockholm, that kind of tries to define what we need to shift within ourselves to be able to meet the sustainable development goals. But that's not the only thing. Like I see it also within the transition movement, who has been talking about inner transition for a long time, etc., etc. And I think that there's a longing from people to live differently and have other kind of values and that driving them, and other kind of seeing what's meaningful in the world, or what gives us purpose. But it's slow. And it's like trickling through, and I see here that we need all of the things at the same time. And equally, you were talking about the sharing economy and etc. There's different economic movements that I find really interesting, and one of them is the economy for the common good. That answers or asks the first question is: so your company, what has it done for the common good? Because you're using up all our resources. So what do you contribute to the common good? And I think like they're small things, but I think they're really, really important. But as a systemic thing, I think Ecocide Law is excellent because it fits into an already existing system.
Fascinating. I think echo similar sentiment, but just gonna bring in some of the governance dynamics to systems change. So we've had kind of what we call in international law the Westphalian system, kind of built in European 17th century kind of member states, the UN system and so forth. But it's nice to have 196 countries, but with all our diversity, we're just one species. And I think for systems change, we need to begin in a place of compassion and humility. And that's where the work on trusteeship or stewardship or guardianship comes, which encapsulates the wonderful work of rights of nature, whilst there is, for example, wild rice in the United States going to court against the state, and the interesting conversation between Maori tribes in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with regard to the rights of the river Wanganui, going to court against the state. And these are interesting illustrations of how things ought to have been. And those two cases, there are many others I could cite, are all coming from the wisdom of indigenous laws. And here I'll give one example from Aotearoa, from the Maori tribes, what they call kaitiaki tanga. Once we say a trusteeship or stewardship, kaitiaki tanga loosely translates to the guardianship of us as one species. If I'm a human being, I have a guardianship of the tree, but the tree has a guardianship over me, because simply I give out carbon dioxide and the tree gives out oxygen. Kind of we require that to live on the planet. And it goes deeper into the philosophical conversation, which we call customary principles of law, which brings that aspect into things like Ecocide Law, which needs to be unpacked further. And this body of law is around, this wisdom is around on the planet. We've not looked at it because we've gone in a kind of a different direction over, yes, 1970s, but I would push it to even the last 300 years since the Industrial Revolution. We need to really pick ourselves and be humble and correct that. Some of the steps being taken within the governance paradigm, which is brought out in one of the newer books, which I refer to, which is called Reflections of Earth Trusteeship. There's a copy behind, you can have a look. It's different approaches that the scientists and the ecologists and young people are trying to bring on how we could be trustees of the resources that we do not own, but we hold it in trust for those who are here now, but those who are yet unborn, who's going to come after us. Easier said than done in the current economic model. And that's something which also comes from the indigenous systems. And some of the organizations are pushing for example, the World Future Council, I think I was mentioned to earlier, was pushing for something called an ombudsperson for future generations. Now, this is not an office to consider what's going on now, but how policies that we bring about has an impact in the long-term future. And this is being lobbied with the United Nations since 2007. And in 2013, the Secretary General called for a specialized report on it. And this is in the current Secretary General, which is called Our Common Agenda, which came out in 2021 as a specific recommendation to have a special envoy on future generations. This is not youth, this is not children, these are those who are going to come way after we have left the planet, which is 80 to 100 years if you're lucky, but if you're certain parts of Nigeria, your life expectancy can be about 35 to 40 because of the pollutions that is going on there. So we need to factor these kind of decisions because in the indigenous system, there have always been the Elders Council that will bring the young people and the spirit of those who have gone before them into any significant decision making. And that's important. We are kind of understanding what we do today as once part of the species on the planet and the impact we have, realizing what is on one side, what our individual carbon footprint is, but also what we could do to change. I think that comes at every level. And I believe small is beautiful. I believe in it. And I think that really should inform the next generation of governance mechanisms. The smaller the unit, the better it is. And we're moving the conversation, and I'll just stop with this on human rights. 75 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were adopted in 1948. It's going to be celebrated this December on the 10th. We must always remember all and every single right is only exercised through corresponding duties. And we forget the responsibilities, we're not going to recognize the rights. And Polly Higgins pushes this conversation on ecocide, saying ecocide is equal to right to life. If we are saying right to life as human beings, as one species on the planet, surely that can be extended to all life forms on our planet. And that is, I think, where this system change needs to come about as well.
Thank you. I have about 50 more questions to ask you, and I'm not going to because it seems to me rude to let people come and watch and not give them a chance to think about what they've heard. So I'm going to give you a few minutes each, and if you can, in pairs and online in the chat, to write what do you find interesting? You've been listening for about an hour. What do you find interesting about this idea of ecocide law? And if you can form pairs, and I'll get the time, and you will try, if you would like, something a bit unusual, which is one person thinks about what do I find interesting about ecocide law, and I'll give you 2 minutes. And then the other person gets to listen for all of 2 minutes and not interrupt and give their full attention to the person who is thinking. And then I'll tell you after 2 minutes and you swap roles. And the people who are online will have to do this on their own or with a friend. So get the pairs together and I'll let you know when the 2 minutes are up. One person starts.
Former Per. Talk to the woman next to you.
I did this with my students. And the first time I did it, they were like, that was so weird. We're always trying to prepare to interject or what I'm going to say to oppose or what not. And then all of a sudden I'm just going to listen.
But they like it. Yeah. Once they get used to it. Yeah.
Mr. Skelton, you guys might know.
Yeah.
We had a co-taught a lecture last week with students, and we did this little exercise as well. We took them out for a walk, and our instructor instructed them very clearly. He said, okay, so one person talks, and the other person listens, and the other person, you listen. You don't prepare what you're going to say, right? You listen to what the other person's saying. It's, you know, you're the one that, we caught it from you. Didn't quite work. They were babbling all the time, and it was a fun walk, and we had some, you know, great conversations, but it didn't quite work. The experiment went badly wrong.
Yeah, but they need to do it several times.
Yeah.
I do it throughout the whole class.
Yeah.
First, I find it very strange, but then they actually like it.
Wonder if people are accustomed to trust that their brain would produce something clever without them preparing it.
Okay. Change roles. So the person, now the other person's side.
So tell the people online.
We've changed roles here. And if you're at home online then or somewhere else, then just keep thinking and writing in the chat.
Yeah.
Because that's what I used to do when I was teaching online.
Right. And then breakout groups.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier about, you know, the pluses and minuses of virtual interactions, right? And there are some pluses if you rethink the structure of the interactions that you want to try to stimulate, then you can actually make the virtual world work well for you. Yeah. But if you simply try to recreate the physical world virtually,
Now I have to do things differently. Yeah.
I was in a meeting yesterday, and we needed to discuss, all of us were like 10 or 15, what to focus on next meeting. We had something like 10 minutes. And so I was so grateful because one of the participants said, well, I'll arrange breakout rooms. And then within a few seconds, everyone was thrown into a breakout room.
cool.
Yeah, and then 4 minutes later, we could have a vote.
Oh, wow.
So it's
Wow.
so we can shift the rooms. Very,
Yeah.
During COVID, I haven't done it often, but during COVID we did think pair square exercises in breakout rooms. So first you have to think, then you put 2 by 2, and then you merge.
Right.
So you have 4 in a row,
Right.
and then they come back.
Right. We did that once. The American chief.
Okay. Could we have just a few voices, just a few things that you find interesting? We can't do everybody, but just a few people.
I'm just interested in international law as more as norm building, right? That's what this feels like to me, is not something where very many people are going to go to court in violation of this law, and very few countries may. Okay, significant offenders probably won't ever ratify this. So it's more like one of those treaties that says, hey, we're not going to use landmines, where it's like just norm building that using landmines isn't okay by like a piece of international law, because it's like there's not really an enforcement agency in international law. It's about communers talking to each other, like countries talking to their peers.
Neshan is prompting. What's your name? Would you tell us?
My name's Ian.
I didn't ask for it, so but please say that. Then we'll have one or two people more, and then in a while, I'm going to ask you to think about what questions you have. So this is just things you find interesting, and we'll go for questions in a minute.
Yeah. I thought that the idea of accountability is really the most interesting one to me, because right now and for many years you could do whatever you want, because nature doesn't reply instantly in a way that would hurt us. It takes like a lot of time for nature to answer, basically. So this form of accountability, that was the most interesting part of that, and also question arising from that, but we'll get to that later.
What was your name?
Magnus.
Thank you. Have we got anybody online? Would you like to read something out from?
See if I have the microphone. I have this microphone. Is it on?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, actually, I only have questions. So maybe we should save those for later.
Well, we'll save the questions for later. Okay. One more person, and then we'll give you some time to think about questions.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts about what was interesting is just who it would apply to and which actors would be trying to apply to what other actors. So I think missing in that presentation was just some more understanding and context on that. So my background is I'm a farmer. I grew up on a cattle ranch and a grain farm. So I'm thinking about ecocide and maybe different applications of what was the examples here. So that was my thoughts.
We seem to be heading into questions. Have a couple of minutes to talk about what questions you have in the same pairs, and then we'll go for questions. Okay?
But should we answer? No?
We'll do it. We'll do it all at once.
Okay.
Rather large meeting that use that approach. It's exponential expansion. And it was fun the first couple of times when you went from small groups to slightly larger groups, and then it just got like whacked when you went from 16 to 32.
Yeah.
And the damage.
Yeah.
Not like
Yeah.
and then continue.
Till everybody on the planet was talking to each other.
I call that
I was reading a lawsuit. Young people in Montana were successful.
Okay. Bring them on. What questions do you have? Would you like to start from the chat, the online people. Sarah, would you like to give us some questions?
Good to do so.
And we'll have a few, and then we'll get to answers.
Yeah.
We'll see whether we can do some more.
So we have one question from Caroline online. Thank you for hopeful event and important work. Is this law controlling for political bias and influence, for instance, as shown by the ICC's tragically blinkered overemphasis on Africa?
Could you say that again?
Yes. Is this law controlling for political bias and influence? And the comparison is with the current, according to the question, overemphasis on Africa.
Okay, because the current crimes in the ICC have tended to be directed prosecutions have been. All right, okay. I think it's yours. I think so. It may be Jonas's, I don't know. Or Vala's. You want to start?
I can start off
Or the
with.
law questions go that way.
Okay. You start and then you can fill in, okay?
I'll
And anybody else, yeah.
I'll start with a simple answer. I think that we have no perfect institution. We have nothing is perfect. First of all, Ecocide Law will not be perfect. The ICC will not be perfect either. I think there are two sides to it, and I cannot. I don't have the expertise, and I haven't looked into it, so I don't know really how biased it is. What I've heard, talking with experts in the ICC, is that you have more cases that comes from Africa than, for instance, from Europe, because it's a court of last resort. So if the legal system is weak and it could be dangerous, or for some other reason the nation don't want or can't prosecute in their own home country, which would be the norm, they would ask the help of the ICC. So there's a natural movement from, you could say, states with weaker legal arrangements to use that resource. And then I'm sure there are cases that you could discuss and have very strong opinions about if this so-called dictator or the previous should be convicted or not. And I cannot, I don't have that expertise. But just relaying what I've heard when I've kind of brought that up.
Sure. I mean, thank you for the question, Caroline, and I think it's a fair question. But just to add to what Jonas was saying, we have 123 member states which are signed on to the Rome Statutes as of this year. That's maybe 60 less than the membership of the United Nations. But still, the other side of the coin is that most of the African states have ratified the Rome Statute, and they do recognize the jurisdiction of this institution, however perfect or imperfect it is as a human creation. But the International Criminal Court is an evolution of the other institutions which have been around and tested. Some of them have stood the test of time. For example, the International Court of Justice, which is part of the United Nations, takes precedence from the Permanent Court of International Justice, which is 101 years old, if you want to consider that it was built in 1922, and then closed down with League of Nations. But the International Court of Justice picks it up from 1946 onward. And the International Criminal Court, building on the kind of the experience of the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials, which is very much connected to this part of the world, and not so much Africa, because the World Wars were really focused in this part of the world. And then that learning led to the International Criminal Court for the first time allowing individuals to be brought before that court to be held accountable. It's still in its early stages, because I think although the Rome Statute was signed and agreed in 1998, it really got operationalized in the early 2000s, 2004-05. And in 2022, which was kind of last year, they celebrated 20 years of it being around working. So it allows a forum to go beyond the conversations on individual nation states and to bring individuals responsible for crimes that were listed out in the Rome Statute. So I think it's another institution. It's something that we will work with. And as Jonas said, there are certain instances that the national jurisdiction cannot hear it, but there's something called the complementarity rule, where even if states feel that a certain cases can go to the International criminal code and they've signed the Rome Statute, they can hand over the individuals concerned, and this being seen as a respect of adherence to rules that we've come up with over time. And that flows into the question of international law, and this is a question I get quite a lot. Sorry, your name was again? Ian. I get it quite a lot in law school, mind you, saying it's not really law. It's a nice book somewhere. We read about it, but the fascinating thing about international law, it is very much real law. But unfortunately, we live in a time, and even in the past, that where law is respected is really not talked about. It is when the law is kind of violated, then it makes the news, right? It's because if person crosses the road on the white line where he or she is supposed to cross the line, that's not newsworthy. The flip side, I'll give 2 examples very quickly. One is the equality of nation states, because there's this idea that bigger states have more power. Not true. In the late 1980s, there was a case between Nicaragua and the United States with regard to sending and equipping paramilitary groups in Nicaragua to overthrow the government in Nicaragua. Nicaragua took this case to the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice held against the United States, which led to the US obviously having a lot of problems internally because of the Parliament. They started questioning what's going on. Suddenly became big news. And then the fact that, you can look at it as, okay, Nicaragua won against the United States. But if you unpack that further, it's that international law is respected mostly. When it is not respected, that hits the media outlets. A few years later, there was a very small country called Chad that took on a very big country with a huge military called Libya for a very small space called the Aouzou Strip. And Libya said, historically, that's ours. So they decided to march in the army. That's really not much Chad could do. They were not going to go to war with Libya. There was no chance. But they agreed to go to the International Court of Justice before, I mark this was before a single bullet was fired. Right? And I think you know what I'm getting at. So the ICJ went into historical records and said, Libya, you kind of violated customary principle. Chad actually been there like centuries, millennia before you were kind of even part of the discussion. What happened? Libya met with the foreign minister, defense ministers met. Officially, ceremoniously, the Libyan flag was brought down. Libyan army marched out. The Chad army moved in and hoisted their flag with Libya supporting. Now, did this reach any media outlet? I'm sure I didn't read any of it, right? But isn't that a wonderful example of how international law is respected? But this, of course, doesn't really even get tallied down because a lot of people obviously can't be reading judgments of the International Court of Justice. But it's good to see that I can give numerous other examples. But unfortunately, these institutions, however imperfect they may be, has achieved a huge lot. And it's a crime not to use these institutions when you know in the 21st century there is no place for war. I think we've established this, hopefully, as one species. But still, here we are. And I think that flows into the accountability question. I think unpacking that, and I think Jonas, maybe you bring in the scientific element from what you've been discussing. The sciences have been very clear. The scientists have been talking about this for many, many decades. Now it's about, I think, especially when you hear young people, whether here it's in Sweden or in Europe or in Latin America, they're speaking out. But when it comes to accountability of bigger corporations, the powerful financial giants on the planet, I think there is a bit of a mismatch between those who hold the financial richness on the planet as opposed to who hold the biodiversity richness on the planet. And that's, I think, something we've got wrong over the last 400 years. That's where accountability comes in. And now we need to see, we were talking about tipping points. Is it tipping points too late for what happened in Libya when 25,000 people just disappeared overnight when the floods hit a couple of weeks ago? Do we wait to that tipping point? Which seems to be the case, because that happened with genocide. So do we wait for that? So that most of the species are damaged by our impact on the planet? Or do we try to trace from some of the learnings we're coming? But accountability also, I must say this, working with environmental rights defenders, human rights defenders, there are certain things and actions you can take for accountability in this part of the world, and it is happening, and it's good things. But in certain other parts of the world that I work in, if somebody speaks out, they might not see tomorrow. And that has happened. And right now we speak, there are environmental human rights defenders who die and their families are put under a lot of duress, trying to build the same arguments of accountability. But I think there needs to be partnership, irrespective of where we are on this one small earth. We need to have a conversation. And this is, again, for maybe the youngest, there are small but definite initiatives building on rights of nature, like in companies where shareholders are suing the company, saying you didn't warn us about climate impact on my investments. Is that a start? Maybe.
We have 5 more minutes until we've promised to stop for today. So can we have very, very quick, short answers, questions, and very, very quick, short answers, and then we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid. And yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and the panel discussion. I was just wondering, well, in your opinion, do the risks associated with the Ecocide Law outweigh the benefits in the context of emerging countries and the swiftly growing population?
Yes, and we have a very thorough answer in the economy report, which you can download at ecocide.se, and you'll love it.
And there's a summary over there.
We had a question.
Yes, we
that
had
I'm
a
interested
question.
in hearing the answer for.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm supposed to. Well, the question of to whom? The question of to whom Ecocide Law would apply.
Yeah.
Like, so when I first heard of the Ecocide Law, I was a bit skeptical because I was thinking if I go out and trim my hedge in front of my house, Interpol agents are going to be rappelling down from helicopters and they'll throw me in the clink in the Hague for 20 years. So the lawyers here, to whom does this law apply, and in what cases?
I could start up with a kind of short. I'm not a lawyer, but still, and it dovetails also to Ian's question a little bit. So that the system of the ICC is built up so that it goes after individuals, in contrast to the International Court of Justice, which deals with nations, which means then that you would have a legal opinion, for instance, if a head of environment decides that, go ahead, my nation's fleet, and kill all the whales. That would be a legal opinion from the Court of Justice that they said this is not okay, but there is no sanction on it. With Ecocide Law, it wouldn't be comfortable to be that minister because it goes after individuals and it's criminal and it affects the entire legal system. So it matters not if you're the CEO or if you're the one that signed off the business case at the World Bank, or if you're a lobbyist, or if it's just profiting for it. It goes after the individual where that decision doesn't have to come from, but you need to track it to that person. So and it's kind of built, the definition, the consensus definition, it's built in a way that it favors, I would say, where it's really respectful for weaker nations and weaker populations that are rich on biodiversity and take the consequences. It's kind of built into the definition very beautifully. And I'll stop there.
Yes, but I think what we need to emphasize also is that it's only for very big damaged. You don't go after him because he cut his hedge. But, if you are digging up, oil shale in Canada and North America, and the destruction of the boreal forest is so immense, it takes a whole hour for a jet to fly over the mining area, that's something that could be defined as an ecocide. So it's the big stuff, the major major damage that we were doing to our planetary system.
So I'm not a lawyer, but I would like to see some mock trials on this. It would be lovely to see cases, and especially like from my perspective, when we were discussing computing as ecocide, we couldn't really say if it would lead to ecocide law, or not. But it would be really interesting if someone would set up a mock trial on AI or something. That would be cool.
I'm going to stop right now. And for the people who are here, we can stay on and you can ask more questions. And for the people who are online, they can keep writing questions, and I'm being assured that they will be saved as part of the system. And if you put your email address in there, we should be able to send you an answer, or you can email End Ecocide Sweden, IT@End Ecocide Sweden, or members, or Ecocide Law Alliance, because then it'll get to me. And I think we're going to have to stop right there if we're going to respect the time. Thank you all so much for being here. Those of you who are online, those of you who are here, and those of you who are on the panel. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Monica.
Sure.
Thank you. That's fine. You can just stand up, mingle. We're having some art pictures and just doing random stuff before a kid. Behave randomly. But,
and I'm so sorry I forgot to pick up the questions, and I said, sorry.
We should have used your words.
No, just to respond again. I think you covered most of it.
Large scale production. I mean, that starts to get really big.
Yes.